Joe Biden has been sworn in as the 46th President of the United States, and he's already gotten down to work undoing some of the policies of the previous administration. Shortly after entering the Oval Office, President Biden signed a stack of executive orders, among them rejoining the Paris Climate Accord and reversing an immigration ban on people from several mainly Muslim countries. He's also stepped up measures to fight the coronavirus pandemic and announced key appointments, while his Democratic Party has taken control of Congress. On Wednesday, Biden took the oath of office, promising to bring together a divided nation.
A sea change in U.S. politics.
This is America's day. This is democracy's day. A day of history and hope, of renewal and resolve. Through a crucible for the ages, America has been tested anew, and America has risen to the challenge.
In his inaugural speech as President of the United States, Joe Biden appealed to Americans to overcome their divisions. Without mentioning his predecessor by name, he sounded the beginning of a new era in which he said truth would prevail.
Recent weeks and months have taught us a painful lesson. There is truth and there are lies. Lies told for power and for profit. And each of us has a duty and a responsibility as citizens, as Americans, and especially as leaders. Leaders who have pledged to honor our Constitution and protect our nation, to defend the truth and defeat the lies.
What made this day truly extraordinary in the history of the U.S. was the swearing-in of Kamala Harris, the first Black American, the first Asian American, the first woman to hold the office of Vice President. Looking on was her predecessor, Mike Pence. Unlike Donald Trump, he had come to the ceremony to honor the new administration. Former Presidents George W. Bush and Bill Clinton were there. And so too, Barack Obama, whom Biden served as Vice President. The star power was intensified with Lady Gaga singing the national anthem. Jennifer Lopez with a medley of This Land Is Your Land and America the Beautiful. And country singer Garth Brooks asked everyone to join in Amazing Grace. But the future was heralded by 22-year-old poet Amanda Gorman, who took up the themes of Biden's inaugural speech in a poem addressing the problems of the divided nation and offering hope.
For there was always light, if only we're brave enough to see it, if only we're brave enough to be it.
And Joe Biden, 46th President of the United States, is taking up that challenge.
And joining us now from Washington is our correspondent, Stefan Siemens. Stefan, Joe Biden's inaugural address was all about unity, but the United States seems more divided now than ever. How big of a challenge does Joe Biden face in trying to heal the nation?
Enormous challenge. Not only because the coronavirus pandemic still raging through the United States, Tuesday leaving 4,229 people dead, the second highest in a single day in the United States. Not only because of course there is almost 75 million people who had voted for Donald Trump. And there is millions out of those who still believe now as I'm saying this to you, and who still believed on the day of the inauguration before President Biden swore on his family Bible, that he is not the legitimate president, that the election was stolen. They bought totally into the lies of the Trump administration and others in the Trump universe. That's how bad it is, and that's how divided this country is. And that's why a person like this wonderful Amanda Gorman, this poet, youth poet, made such an impact yesterday for hopefully not only the people who watched right there on the podium what she said, but on the TV, on their TV sets across the nation. In that regard, it is not to be underestimated of what the challenge of the Biden administration is.
We saw Joe Biden, right after being inaugurated, sign a whole stack of executive orders. This is his first full day in office today. What's on his agenda?
Yeah, today more of the same, so to speak, but with a clear focus of the coronavirus pandemic here in the United States. And with that, of course, we're talking about money. He wants more money for the states and for local authorities to actually spend on tracing the virus, on vaccination. There's a breakdown actually at the moment of the distribution system. So this has to be fixed. There's states who don't have enough vaccines anymore. They're running short of vaccines. So the governor of New York just said like he would have to wait for about 8 months to get in line to get his shot because he's 63 years old. But everybody else before, it needs months to actually vaccinate them. So this is a mess which Biden has to clean up, which the Biden administration will have to try to clean up. But again, here also, the Biden administration said, and Joe Biden himself said, there are dark, dark, dark weeks to come for the United States. There's no quick fix for this. Speaking of the 17 executive orders, that was shredding, really shredding the Trump administration's political direction. They had the United States in. That was what this was about. This was historic. There was no other president who had signed in the first day, on Inauguration Day, 17 executive orders, directives, or memoranda.
Stefan, thank you very much. DW Stefan Simons there in Washington. Well, Germany is among the many countries hoping to see closer cooperation with the U.S. under the new administration. Chancellor Angela Merkel sent Joe Biden and Kamala Harris a message congratulating them on their win. She said, "Warmest congratulations on your inauguration, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, a true celebration of American democracy. I look forward to a new chapter of German-American friendship and cooperation." Joe Biden's inauguration has been welcomed around the world. The European Union and NATO are hoping his administration will help rebuild alliances that were strained during Donald Trump's time in office. DW spoke to the president of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen.
I am so pleased that we once again have a friend in the White House. I'm also very pleased that in Kamala Harris, we have the first woman vice president of the United States of America. And it is certainly the case that we have much in common. That begins with the task of managing the pandemic, combating climate change, as well as digitalization. But there are other issues where we have differences of opinion, for example, on the question of a digital tax on big tech and digital platforms. There will certainly be tensions there, but the good thing is, if we are friends, if we are like-minded, then we can have welcome discussion of these issues, and we can hold them fairly, openly, and above all, reliably, and then develop a common approach together.
Well, for more, I'm joined now by Richard Walker, DW's chief international editor. Richard, the EU is clearly happy to have a more cooperative partner back in the White House, but it's not as if the transatlantic relationship will return to the way it was before the Trump era, is it?
Yeah, that's right, Terry. I mean, the relief in the words from Ursula von der Leyen there and also from other leaders around Europe is pretty palpable. But it is also true that the scarring that was left by the last few years is really going to be here to stay. Now, let's just think about what Trump really did to the Western alliance. He really threw the whole question of its logic, of its viability, into question. This was the first time that an American president had done this. And there were real fears that if he had been re-elected, that the NATO alliance, would the United States, under him in a second term, actually just pull out of NATO, leaving the Europeans without a leg to stand on in terms of defence? And that sort of fear is something that really kind of drives debate here in Europe about should Europe really start to stand more on its own 2 feet in matters of defence, but also matters of strategic outlook, really important geopolitical issues. Now, to some extent, that is something that the Americans want, but to another, it is a sign that the Europeans might start deciding to do things that the Americans don't like, and that could cause drift in the alliance.
What's topping the to-do list for the EU and the U.S. as the Biden administration gets down to work, Richard?
Well, I would point to a couple of things. Climate. We've seen that Biden has already signed the Paris Climate Agreement again, rejoining that. And Iran. We could be facing a new crisis over Iran's nuclear program in the weeks ahead even. Biden has signaled that he wants to return to diplomacy on that. You'll see close cooperation between the two sides on that.
OK, so there are definitely parts, places where the EU and the U.S. overlap, but there are also points of contention. What are some of those?
Yeah, well, we heard from Ursula von der Leyen talking about, attacks on big tech, which is one issue, but there are even bigger issues than that. Take, for example, China. Now, China has become this superpower, really challenging the United States more than any power before. Biden wants to rally democracies behind a kind of common line, seeing it really as the beginning of a struggle between democracy and autocracy on the other side. But the Europeans have started going their own way on China and even just recently agreed a new investment treaty with the Chinese side, despite the Biden administration publicly saying, could you please hold off so we can talk about this? So that was an early sign of this independence that we just talked about, this debate in Europe driving the idea that Europe needs to think its own way on big issues that could really cause big transatlantic rifts, even with the kind of healing presence that we see in Joe Biden in the White House.
Talk of strategic autonomy not going away here in Europe. Richard Walker, our chief international editor, thank you so much. Well, China has also expressed cautious hope about the change in the White House, saying it was looking forward to working with the new administration. However, Biden's team has already condemned a decision by Beijing to impose sanctions on a number of Trump officials, including former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, over their criticism of China's mistreatment of its Muslim Uyghur minority. We'll have more on the view from Beijing in a moment, but first, let's take a look at how U.S. ties with China nosedived under Donald Trump.
An expert team from the World Health Organization arrives in China. A visit sparked yet another clash between Beijing and Washington on the coronavirus, with the U.S. calling for a transparent investigation.
The team, which finally arrived last week, will only be successful if it is provided with the following information. All studies produced in China on the presence of SARS-CoV-2 related genetic sequences in animals, animal testing results.
Virus origin studies are of scientific nature. We must stop any political pressure.
Alongside the coronavirus tensions is an ongoing trade and tech war between the two countries. President Trump repeatedly accused Beijing of unfair trading practices and intellectual property theft.
This is the first of many.
And what started as a tariff war also turned political. From China's treatment of Uyghur Muslims in Xinjiang to the crackdown on pro-democracy protests in Hong Kong, the Trump administration pushed back against what it called Beijing's aggressive behavior.
Today, the Chinese Communist Party is crushing freedom in Hong Kong. It's threatening a free Taiwan.
China considers Taiwan as its internal affairs as it sees the island nation as a breakaway province. Washington's recent moves to allow high-level visits have hit a raw nerve in Beijing. The U.S. should abide by the One China principle and stop deeds that interfere in China's internal affairs and undermine China-U.S. relations, which has fallen to their lowest points in 30 years. The current situation in China-U.S. relations is not what China desires to see, and the U.S. is completely responsible for all of this.
We opened our arms to Chinese citizens only to see the Chinese Communist Party exploit our free and open society.
Following a 4-year free fall in bilateral ties, it will be left to Biden to decide where to steer this soured relationship.
Joining us now from Beijing is correspondent Matthias Berlinger. Matthias, how has China reacted to the new president taking office in the U.S.?
Well, China has been very careful for now and has not been as enthusiastic about the new president as many other countries in the world. Yesterday, during the inauguration, China has done something very interesting. It has sanctioned a big number of high officials in the Trump administration who were most adversarial to China, and it has sanctioned them in a way that might harm their future careers. It has sanctioned them, their family members, and all companies that have ties to them, which might potentially make it a lot harder for many of them to find a new job if the companies are involved in any kind of business with China. This is a clear warning to the Biden administration that China will fight back on anything that it sees as an aggression towards China or confrontational politics against China. So the signals they are sending are not signals of a new start, but of a very wary position.
Relations between Beijing and Washington, Matthias, have deteriorated in recent years. There's trade, tech, Taiwan, Hong Kong, the South China Sea, the treatment of Uyghurs. The list is very long, as we saw in the report. Do you see potential for change in Sino-American relations under President Biden?
Well, there will be change, that's for sure, but I don't think it will get back to what it was under the Obama administration or under even more friendly administrations like the Clinton administrations in the 1990s. The Biden administration seems to be under pressure to continue a tough approach towards China, and China itself is on its way to decoupling from the U.S. and to reduce its dependence on the U.S. So I think both countries are also involved in a game of influence with other countries, with countries of the global South, but also with Europe. So I don't think we are going to see a substantial change, but we'll of course see a change of manners and of how this battle is fought.
You say they're engaged in a game of influence. Well, some say that the U.S. needs China more than China needs the U.S. Is there truth in that, Matthias?
I think that's hard to answer right now. I think one thing that Trump has demonstrated is how dependent China is, especially on U.S. technologies. He might have just remember the sanctions, the tech sanctions against Huawei and ZTE, two major Chinese tech companies, which always faltered under a ban to sell chips to them. He might have reached the opposite of what he wanted to reach. He might have led China to strengthen its own tech industry and reduce reliability on the U.S. But for the moment, I don't think we can see a clear picture on any country losing losing the dependency on the other country. Both countries both economies are intertwined, both strategic interests meet, and if there's any region where the U.S. has gained more power in the past few years, it's the neighboring countries of China, which are some of them are the only ones where Trump has been really popular within the last few years.
Matthias, thank you very much for your analysis. That was Matthias Berlinger, journalist in Beijing.